Well, good morning and welcome everybody for the Housing Stability Council meeting. We're still in the process of letting people into the virtual room and we'll just get started in another minute or two.
Attendees is holding steady. Chair Hall.
Okay, then we will convene momentarily. Welcome. It is Friday, September 1st, 2023. September already, wow. And welcome to the monthly meeting of the Oregon Housing Stability Council. Welcome to the more than 80 participants who are in virtual community with us today on this Zoom link. Today's meeting is expected to conclude at about 12:15 p.m. and there will be no mid-meeting break today. We have people signed up for public comment, and the latest list I have is 6 names long, and I had it here right in front of me, folks. Shayla, maybe I'll have you help me out. Who is first on the list?
Chair Hall, if we may call the meeting to order with a roll call.
Okay, I'm sorry. I was jumping the gun wanting to get to the folks. By the way, I found my list. Okay, let's officially call the meeting to order and have the roll call.
Thank you, Chair Hall. Councilmember DeFantorum.
Present.
Councilmember Farrell.
Present.
Chair Hall.
Present.
Councilmember Lee.
Here.
Councilmember Mena.
Here.
Councilmember Rogers.
Present.
Thank you, council members. Chair Hall, we have quorum. Everybody is in attendance today.
Wonderful. Now we'll move on to public comment. And as always, we take comments from people in the order in which they've signed up. We have 6 people in the queue today, and after these folks are called on, if anybody who has not previously signed up wishes to speak, they will have an opportunity to do so then. First up, Neil Whitaker.
Good morning, respected members of the council and Director Bell. I feel that Milepost 5 has been burdened with crime and livability problems for so long by a chronic lack of oversight that the public should be made aware of, that this level of neglect is possible. The pattern of incompetence, for lack of a better word, around criminal backgrounds and lack of accountability and transparency that has damaged the studio's community and building itself is essentially being allowed. CDP was caught overcharging rents almost immediately after they bought the studios, and they also deflected a valid asbestos complaint. The studio's property manager requested to be allowed to speak after tenants during these very meetings, and an OHCS director casually agreed to it. OHCS prevented severely bad race demographic data that claimed the building and neighborhood are above 70% Black to award $3.3 million to a building that is unfortunately over 70% white. The neighbors had to discover that error. And unfortunately, the council voted on this bad data. And if it was an honest mistake, it seems like the vote should be redone. Several ineligible criminals have been discovered on the rent roll at the studios by us, missed by the screening company, missed a second time by the OHCS audit. You even missed violent felons that had been previously discussed as ineligible in your own emails. These felons are also clearly shown as evicted from the studios by Guardian in OJD court documents. So your audit doesn't line up with information from other government sources, but it looks like it favors CDP. CDP claims outwardly to be returning the studios to an arts community, but public record emails reveal asking to convert it to permanent supportive housing. CDP was given $3.6 million in taxpayer funds in 2018, and it's visibly unclear how that amount has disappeared into a building that is still full of outdated systems. So maybe you can help us clarify there. Currently, right now, the studio's lease claims they will not be conducting the required criminal background screening at all for even felony sex offenses per IRS regulations that govern LIHTC. And we brought this up at the July 10th meeting, and you promised to respond, and so far, to my knowledge, you have not. I think to the public, people looking at a property like this coming to their street should just be aware of this general culture of denial and deflection around serious issues, that a chronic drug property is essentially possible. And then the damage will then be compounded by a lack of open and honest communication at even the council level, the people I'm speaking directly to now. If you lack the skills to document, to mitigate these mistakes that have caused real harm to the low-income tenants you claim to center, OHCS needs to facilitate an independent investigation to prevent this from happening at other properties in the future.
We're
Thank you.
past 3 minutes. Thank you, Mr.
Have a
Winter.
nice rest of your day.
Okay, Sarah Gearhart. Is Sarah online?
Sarah, I don't see your name. However, if you're joined by phone, please raise your hand, which is *9.
Kind of saying, I would love for them to try to argue with any of that. Oh,
How about Barbara Geyer?
I do not see Barbara. Barbara, if you're via phone, please use the *9 function. One moment, I have a hand. Barbara, if that's you, go ahead.
Hello. I'm sorry, I'm pressing buttons and I missed. This is Barbara Geyer. Did you call me?
Yes, go ahead,
Yes.
please.
Yes? Okay, fine. Good morning. Good morning, Director Bell, council members. Thank you for allowing me to speak. I would like to, I have a short presentation about the complaint process from tenants to OHCS. My understanding is that HUD and OHCS have an agreement for OHCS to take complaints for the tenants. Now, I have asked many times, several times, what specifically these agreements obligate OHCS to do or investigate, and I would like that in writing. To date, I haven't received that, but I still would like to have that, please. And with regard to communications, complaints, and responses, I am suggesting that these all be in writing. And apparently that is not an agreement between everyone, whether it should be in writing if requested or if HUD has required this or not. So what I'd like to know specifically would be who your intake person spoke with in question, what the responses the landlord had to the complaint, what positions the landlord took, and also in writing, and then also provide an opportunity for the tenant to respond to that report in writing, of course. So my question actually would be, does HUD review the complaint process that OHCS conducts? And if it's only verbal, how do you do that? And then the last question would be, is there any appeal process following your determination? So it's really three things I'm asking. I'm asking for what types of complaints OHCS investigates, and I would like that in writing so we can refer to that. What the complaint process is, and to have that entire process be in writing both ways so that we can all read that, and then find out about an appeal process of your determination. That's it. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Rick Solon, is Rick on the line?
I do not find Rick's name on the list. Rick, if you're via phone, please use the raise hand function at *9.
Okay, how about Jillian Felton?
I am here. Thank you.
Okay, welcome. Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Chair Hall and Housing Stability Council. I am here today on behalf of over a dozen nonprofit developers, lenders, and members of the Housing Oregon Metro Policy Council. And I have submitted via email these comments, and I'd like to read them to you now. The Affordable Rental Housing Division of OHCS held an engagement meeting yesterday, August 31st, around readiness to proceed criteria requirements for funding. This was regarding all funding, including 4% low-income housing tax credits, but also including LIFT, PSH, and other state resources. Staff proposed that projects must be within 6 months of financial close in order to be eligible for funding. This is simply unachievable. We understand staff will be presenting the notes from our conversation yesterday to you today, but we wanted to be sure that you fully understand the depth of our concern. As a community of developers who are successful, committed, and dedicated to this work, our concerns and perspectives are important. Requiring that projects be 6 months to financial close would, in most jurisdictions, mean that a project had already submitted for permits and was fully designed. This is not a reasonable expectation. This would require a nonprofit partner to take on the risk of not only acquiring the property, but also fully funding pre-development costs, including design, engineering, and permitting. For a small project, pre-development costs are easily over $1 million. For larger projects, it's $2 to $3 million. Land costs in the metro area are at least $25,000 per unit. In order to be within 6 months of financial close, a sponsor developer like ourselves would be extending over $4 million between land acquisition and pre-development costs for a 75-unit project with no guarantee of funding. This amount of risk is unreasonable for all, but also disproportionately impacts community-based organizations and culturally specific organizations. This is further complicated by an increasingly tight credit market where local grassroots nonprofits are required to prove funding commitments are in hand before a lender will extend the millions of dollars of debt necessary to get a project to financial close. This is obviously antithetical to the council and OHCS's stated equity goals. The current focus on readiness to proceed as an award criteria, which is 12 months, is already burdensome. The urge to fund projects that can move forward quickly is admirable and understandable, and we are all striving to achieve it. But it should be balanced with how the development process currently works and should not come at the expense of equity, community, and supportive housing goals. There are ways to speed up the timeline for affordable housing development. In the engagement meeting yesterday, some of the suggestions included eliminate the requirement for sponsor leverage with other resources. This leads to delays as additional funding is sought.
Excuse me, we're past the 3-minute time. So if you could wrap your thoughts, please.
Yes, I will. Thank you very much. So the 3 suggestions I listed in the letter are to eliminate leverage, having to get additional funding, slows the project down, capacity building and technical assistance for funded projects, and a robust pre-application process that could give the sponsor and lenders assurance on the front end and give OHCS some more control during the process. So thank you very much for your time. And we all look forward to the continued engagement and discussion around these issues. I hope you will have the opportunity to read the recommendations in detail, and I will have come to you via email.
Thank you. Amber Cook.
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Loud and clear. Go ahead,
Okay.
please.
Thank you, Chair Hall. Greetings, Housing Stability Council members. I protest the updates OHCS is providing because what is written in them simply is not true. It's touting 3 surveys returned that included some positive response. This from renters whose identities are fully exposed by returning the survey. Did they feel safe, to be really honest? Whoever writes the updates about Milepost 5 has no understanding of Milepost 5 and doesn't bother to fact check before posting them as truth. Saying the art house has been reopened and is now thriving. The art house has been open for 2 years. The artist workshop, on the other hand, promised to all renters as an amenity at move-in and paid for as part of our community spaces and our rent, has been locked up for over 3 years and still is. Yes, Cornerstone Residential Services may have an attractive office, but it's open for 3 hours a week. All those hours during the day while people are working, the same day of the week every week. So how useful or helpful is that really? Free Wi-Fi coming? CDP promised OHCS free public Wi-Fi for Milepost residents in their bid for acquisition in 2008 and still haven't delivered it. These are not updates. It says all windows but one were fine and now that one was fixed. There's a resident whose window has been broken for 2 years. You can drive by the property and see it on 81st Avenue for yourself. It says the sidewalks are clean and free from hazards or debris. One senior resident tripped on jutting concrete pieces in the sidewalk along the building, bruised her skull, and broke both her arms last month. It says more signage throughout the building is recommended to help both management and tenants know how to better take care of their home and their property. Oh my gosh, so insulting. Are you people kidding? We have drug dealers and buyers, sex workers and pimps, trespassers, vagrants and squatters in the building at all times. And you're suggesting signs to lecture residents on good behavior? Oh, it says all security doors were securely closed and appear to be functioning properly. No, even the new entrance doors are so cheaply constructed, they're broken or jimmy-rigged, so they're always at least one or two, if not that anyone can enter at any given time. These updates don't come from us who actually live there, and they undermine us by painting a gloss over a veneer. If the time and energy that went into strategizing and crafting these PR spin updates went into actual enforcement of housing laws, we could have decent low-income housing and a flourishing artist community here again. We don't need signage, OHCS, to tell us residents how to behave. We need 24/7 security on the property at all times, actively stopping and removing all the trespassers that were allowed in with the 3 broken entrance doors for 2 or 3 years that nobody stopped for the next 12 months so that Milepost Fine gains a new reputation, not as a criminal and squatter paradise with 0 consequences for any harmful behavior, but a safe and sanitized residence protected
Excuse
by
me.
owners and management and
Excuse
housing
me.
authority.
Excuse me.
I'm done. Thank you very
Yeah,
much.
I'm sorry.
Chair Hall.
Okay, thanks. Bye. Sarah Gearhart. Has Sarah ever joined us?
Yes, one moment.
Okay,
Go ahead, Sarah.
Hi, I'm Sarah from Milepost 5. Amber started me off on a good point there. That's actually what I was going to do. I was coming today to talk and say nothing but positive things, but unfortunately, there's been some trouble with the doors. Go figure. So we had some theft in the art house, a lot of it over the course of 5 days at the beginning of the month, and I still have heard nothing about it. It's real simple, folks. Fix the doors, fob in, fob out. I mean, it's a simple solution. There shouldn't even be people coming into this building, but it gets propped open because that's the only way you can get back in and back out without having to walk a half a block in the middle of the night if you're painting. It's a little ridiculous. The other thing is that as far as the negative things, I just want to get them out of the way. The other thing is that the ADA here is just ridiculous. It's not ADA compliant in this building. I am part-time in a wheelchair now because I'm injured my spine and I just can't even get around. There needs to be some ramps, some automated doors. We need to fix this. We can do better than this. Now let's get back to the positivity. So at Milepost 5, we have a nonprofit group and we are doing the good work. We're out doing community outreach. Still 2 times a week, we do wellness fairs. We are applying for a grant to do some murals in the area for some of the over graffitied places. We're looking into doing some painting and art therapy for children at the children's wards of the hospital. So we are working really hard on outreach in the community, and we also have some art shows coming up in October finally, because they all got delayed due to construction, unfortunately. So in October, we will be very busy. Come visit us for the art show, the craft fair, and the haunted house. And yeah, that's really all I have to say this week, but we need some help. We need the doors fixed. That's what we need more than anything right now. The doors fixed and the bugs getting taken care of. Thank you.
Thank you. Rick Solon. Has Rick joined us yet?
I still do not find Rick on the list here. If you're via phone, please use the raise hand function, *9. Anybody
Okay.
else who not previously signed up?
Pardon
please
me?
press the *9 function.
Sorry. So is there anyone on the line who did not sign up but wishes to offer public comment at this time?
We have one raised hand, Peter
Okay.
Haney.
Welcome, Peter. Go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Hall, Director Bell, members of the committee, the council. Thank you for all of the great work that you guys do. I know oftentimes you don't hear some appreciation for the work that you guys do. And having been in this business for 30 years and understanding the pressures that we're all under to build the housing and provide the services to folks, it's a lot of hard work. I wanted to reiterate the letter from Housing Oregon. You know, oftentimes when we look to revamp allocation methods, there's unintended consequences. In my 30 years, we've talked about this allocation method many times, and oftentimes we've talked about a pre-application process to help us, you know, weed out and provide technical assistance to those who might you know, be a little bit further behind and need some extra time and help. So I want us to remember, sometimes we got to slow down. 40 years of disinvestment cannot be, you know, fixed within or with 36,000 units being produced each year. So secondly, I wanted to talk about how the reports or how when you guys get your council packets, and it's reported that there's collaborations and partnerships with culturally specific organizations. And I think it would benefit the council to know a little bit more detail on what those partnerships look like. You know, because we can have anything from a majority ownership in a project to a simple MOU. And really understanding what that partnership looks like, I think will benefit the decisions that you make and the questions that you ask on those projects. So I wanted to throw that out there. Finally, as we approach the 3rd anniversary of the Labor Day fires, I want us to, you know, think about, you know, where we're at as far as serving the folks in some of those devastated communities. I know that there's been some press recently on some of the efforts, and I think, you know, we should also look at some of the successes that are happening in some of those communities. CASA will be doing a ground blessing later this month down in Southern Oregon for a couple projects, a farm worker housing project that's currently under construction. And we've just started placing units down at Talent Mobile Estates, which will be a resident-owned cooperative. So I just wanted to say thank you for the work that you're doing, and I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll call again for Rick Solon. No sign of Rick?
No.
Okay, one more call for anyone not signed up who wishes to offer public comment at this time. All right, then, we will now close public comment, move on to chair's remarks, and segue right from that into the director's report. Well, I think highlight, all but one of the members of the council was able to join us for at least part of our session on Tuesday with a trio of attorneys from the Oregon Department of Justice. I would invite the reflections of other council members as well as Director Bell, but I thought it was a very important and very productive meeting that I think it brought clarity to both our decision-making and our advisory roles. I don't know, it kind of feels to me like the council's about to level up, just as the agency has been leveling up as more and more resources and the trust that goes along with those resources are being funneled into and through OHCS to help us house every Oregonian. So, any council members with observations on Tuesday? Council Member Farrell.
Thank you, Chair Hall. Yeah, it was a really enlightening meeting. I'm really grateful that we had the opportunity to have some clarity in terms of our role and our responsibilities. And I also just want to state that I really look forward to having more opportunity for like generative dialogue and sort of a deeper dive into some of the topics that we don't really have the capacity to go into within these public meetings, or at least the way our agendas are currently scheduled. So I think that it's going to be a really great opportunity to help enhance our learning and hopefully be able to contribute in a better way.
Wonderful. Let's see. Any other council reflections? If not, I'll turn things over to Director Bell for the director's report.
Wonderful. Thanks, Chair Hall. Let me
I'm sorry, Councilmember Mania.
Yep.
Thank you, Chair Hall. Just a couple of things, not necessarily about the meeting last week or this week. Unfortunately, I was not able to attend, had a conflict. But I did want to speak out to the transparency that that we need to make sure that we continue to exercise, and we've heard consistently in regard to milepost 5, in regard to other activities. I am concerned about the requirement on this that the project has to be able to fund within 6 months. I mean, we at the local jurisdictions depend on having commitment from OHCS before a lot of things come in. So definitely would like to have further conversations on that policy later on. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Bell?
Wonderful. Thank you, Chair Hall, members of the council. Good morning. It's good to see you. Good to be in virtual community. Certainly appreciate and take to heart all of the public comment and, quite frankly, folks' continued commitment to be here and to give us feedback as an agency. I think I want to just note, just for visibility on a commitment, we will be sure to follow up, I think, for the individual that named a need and some expectations for some follow-up and clarity and guidance, that we'll be sure to do so in writing. So we'll just note that as a follow-up item so that we can get that information out. I have a few things at the top, and I think most of them are actually quite reflective of some of the comments that we've heard both from the council and in public comment here today. So I'll just jump right into it. So I think the first one is, I think the council is probably abundantly aware at this time, I have been quite a broken record. I'm sure the team has been a bit of a broken record as well, as it relates to actually what is more of a federal issue as we've continued to pursue solvency around the reality of being private activity bond cap constrained. That is something that is not only faced here in Oregon, but also experienced probably in a lot of our communities across the nation, which is just a very clear limiting factor to be able to really facilitate the expansive goals and outcomes that we have in production of affordable housing. One of the key pathways that has been proposed and has generated the most bipartisan support has been the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act. I think we have been Since we testified in Congress, I believe last year, we've seen more bipartisan support for that. Much of that has not been because of the state agency. It has really been the galvanization of cities and counties and mayors and leaders across the nation in multiple capacities, naming this need and expectation for congressional action on that. So I bring that up, one, just for council awareness that it is a unresolved issue, and it is something that we're continuing to push for solvency towards. I want to appreciate all of the folks that have lent their name and voice and time towards pushing towards progress in that area. Obviously, the more that we talk about production, there has to be an equal conversation around what we need from our federal government and where we need from our federal partners. And this is a very clear need that we're going to continue to rightfully push on in that regard. Secondly, I want to talk a little bit about, we'll have more conversation about it today, and it will be a reoccurring topic over the next few months, certainly into the fall, which is around our notice of funding availability and the work that we are doing to be able to incentivize more progress and work towards more progress on the production side. So as council is well aware, we have here at OHCS, we have somewhere in the realm of about 15 active development funding programs. So you hear about them a lot. So from 9% low-income housing tax credit, 4% low-income housing tax credit, National Housing Trust Fund, agricultural work housing tax credit, 15 upwards around 15 sources of funding to support production. Given that we came out of session with a little over $1 billion in housing resources to be able to achieve and be able to facilitate progress in that, there is a clear and inherent mandate that to really achieve sustainable progress, not just as a state agency, but collectively for all of the folks that make the production actually happen on the ground and in communities across the state. There is an inherent mandate that as an agency that we're going to need to start really kicking the tires and looking under the hood as to some of the core operational components, and to really be a little bit investigatory about what's working and what isn't and what is going to need to improve. And this is a clear area where there's just an inherent mandate for shift and change. Now, as part of that realization that that shift and change just must happen given the scale of resources, the change in the economic environment, one of the areas that we have received some really helpful and specific constructive criticism is about where are some opportunities to really step up how we engage. And is it engagement based on our own definition, or is it really engagement based on the folks by which we seek to engage in and get feedback on? So just for council awareness, we are engaging in changing the NOFA process really with some very specific goals in mind. This includes reducing the time between OHCS funding commitments and units being placed in service, to increase, hopefully increase consistency and predictability for development community to access funding, to improve access and outcomes for culturally specific and rural developers. And I want to acknowledge that when we talk about rural, there's big rural, and I recognize that there might be smaller scale rural as well. And so I want to acknowledge that uniqueness in that experience, to increase access for communities previously and currently underserved by state investments. And we have a really good understanding from a data perspective, but also from a qualitative experience about what that looks like and where that underinvestment is taking place. And then also to optimize public investments in that as well. In that we're, as you heard at the top, we are engaging in a number of conversations. And I also want to be very clear that no decisions have been made. It is true and authentic engagement in terms that there is no presupposed outcome into it. And so we're really coming into those conversations with the intention of being clear about why behind the change, clarity in the goals, but this is really our hopefully better attempt at taking a more substantial swing at true engagement that does not have a presupposed outcome, that hopefully has a better level of transparency, not by our definition, but by the folks we are engaging in as well. And our desired outcome, in addition to those goals, is really to ensure that folks have a true opportunity to name their needs and expectations, and to be able to hold the agency able and capable as well in that. So I want to just name that because we're going to have a lot of conversations. We are engaging in this knowing there's going to be a lot of vibrant conversation, and in that we're going to likely need to shift and move based on our consciousness that's raised from our partners about where there are vulnerabilities, where we're just off in something and need to be able to shift as well in that. But want to make sure collective visibility around what that engagement process is as well. And our hope is that we'll continue to get better at it as we go through with this as well. I imagine this may be a topic that we want to spend, I think it was mentioned at the top, slow down a bit and spend a little bit more time on, so council can really dive into the pieces as opposed to, only having memos, only having conversations that we swiftly move to. I think this is probably a worthwhile one to slow down and really get into the meat of. And so I'll yield to you, Chair Hall, and the council members on that. But I think clearly from our seat, this would be one area that we think is very much worthwhile, as it's going to shape our future to really spend some time in. And then thirdly, so earlier this year, members of the team brought the racial equity assessment tool in front of you. And really the goal of the REIT implementation was really to begin demonstrating some timely practical tools and ways in which the agency can begin to really continue advancing and stepping up our racial equity goals. In ways that we can, that are part of the agency's standard ways of doing business. So I think to be very clear about it, I think one of the things amongst many that I've learned from the statewide housing plan is, one, not only being clear on outcomes that we are trying to achieve, but also making sure that they can stand the test of time across the agency, so that, in a future environment, if I'm not here, if there are, naturally occurring shifts, we want that to be part of the agency's work, and to make sure that there's a collective consciousness about how to practically do that in all areas of our work with that. At that time when the REIT was brought to you, it was really to get it in front of the council to see, to be able to show some progressive steps forward in how we're beginning to advance that work within the agency. And so under the leadership of Chelsea Bunch, and then also with Megan Bolton, who oversees our research team, we're beginning to put that clear commitment and action into some really clear next steps as well. And so what we'll probably come back to you in front of the council to share with you how that is beginning to be implemented and rolled out across all of our programmatic divisions. And for the first time, we actually have staff capacity and structure to help support the work. What a phenomenon that we need staff capacity and infrastructure to actually facilitate the work. We don't have everything that we need in terms of capacity and infrastructure, but we certainly have more capacity than what we've had to really help deliver on this work. And many of our racial equity teams across the agency that represent different parts of the agency are engaged and represented. And within that structure, it also has areas of shared accountability for all folks. So including the executive director, for division directors, and then also leaders across the agency. And in this, of course, there's already learnings as we're beginning to do this. But I think really under the mandate and the charge of the council that we've continued to hear, we don't want to wait for a future environment of perfection to get moving. We want to start something and we'll optimize it and get feedback and then improve it along the way. But time is of the essence, given the scale of resources. We need to make sure that we are racializing our commitments and beginning to move that forward in a very real way. So we will bring that back to you in all of its learnings and fumbles and things that are going well as well, so that council can be part of that journey with us as well. And then the last item, and then I'll yield back to you, Chair Hall, is we are nearing the 3rd anniversary of the devastation of the wildfires. And I think that candidly continues to be one of the things that is top of mind for me in so many ways. We were recently in Jackson County, had the opportunity to get in front of a number of providers that are really on the front lines every single day, leading and facilitating recovery, and many of whom were directly impacted themselves in more ways than one. We also had the opportunity to engage in some conversation with applicants as well, who directly lost their homes and were working towards a rebuild process in that. And I will say that that particular area of our work, it was mentioned a little bit earlier, there are certainly areas of progress, and I don't want to undermine that by any stretch of the imagination. But some of the learnings from those conversations, one, just to hear a little bit of texture about what life has been like for folks in those communities, and to be able to also hear areas where we're coming up short, even despite the best, attempt, even best intent, knowing that there is still a lot of work for us to do as an agency, knowing that disaster recovery is the newest part of our agency. It is the newest part of the way that we are of service as well. And so certainly keeping that top of mind as well. And we certainly want to come back in front of the council about what action looks like in terms of that commitment, because 3 years is long and 3 years has been far too long. And I'm recognizing that there is still so much work for us to do in that as well. So that rounds out the topics that are top of mind for me, for the council. I'll yield back to your hall and see if there's any reflections or questions before we move into today's agenda.
Council reflections or feedback? Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Chair Hall. Thank you for the update, Director Bell. I particularly appreciate the knowing how the work is expanding and growing related to racial justice and equity. One group of people that I think got left out of that conversation of what are we doing, how are we looking, is actually the council ourselves. And, Chair Hall, you talked earlier in your remarks about leveling up the council. This is a critical place for me, and I think for others, to level us up. And I would like to see a much more explicit engagement amongst ourselves and with the skilled staff people we have within the agency, because there is work for the council to be doing, us with us, related to racial justice and equity that we haven't yet engaged in. And I would certainly expect that we would be a part of the efforts that are now sort of expanding throughout the agency. Again, I don't know how this happens. I don't know where we find the time, and Councilmember Farrell, to your point, I don't know where we find the time. I don't know how we work it in. I don't know when and how and if we get to engage, but we got to figure it out, and we have to figure it out. So I just want to put us on notice, and myself included, that we got some work to do. We got some work to do in this area specifically, and we need to be connected in a much more real way with the work that the agency is doing around this. And I look forward to a chance to figure that out together. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Lee. Anybody else from the council at this point? Hearing none, we will move on to the presentation from the Affordable Rental Housing Development and Director Natasha Detweiler-Dobby.
Chair Hall, may I make one quick comment? And
of
you
course,
can feel free to tell me to wait too as well. And I
No, go
will
ahead, please.
yield in that. If I may just put forth a recommendation for the council to consider, and I'll look to the council to tell me whether this is suitable or not. As I'm thinking about the topics that have that I've sort of collected based on the council mandate, council feedback, as the things that we need to dig into. I could imagine the logistics involved with trying to coordinate schedules and find extra times to meet and all of those things. And there's a time and a place, and we can do that. I would also recommend that if the council is so obliged and we can begin to deeply engage, I think, in these conversations, I think I would certainly be amenable to reshifting our agenda as it's projected out. So we know what items need to get voted on. Many of those are critical items to keep projects moving. Aside from that, we certainly can shift agenda items that are important but not critical to a later time to begin pivoting after we get through business items for these things that we need to get into. It will be likely imperfect, as a lot of things are, and we don't have to wait months and months as well either. So I will just put that forth, a recommendation, Chair Hall, and we could probably start that as soon as the October meeting, if that is suffice to the council.
Okay, council members, any feedback on that? Council Member Farrell.
Yeah, I actually think that would be really great. And I also wonder, and if this is not appropriate, that's fine. Chair Hall, you can tell me this, but I wonder if there's like a survey that we could do with the rest of the council members to see like if there's some consensus around what those more critical conversations might be, so that we have some input on what those conversations, at least topically, might be. Is that an option? Because I think we're still waiting for DOJ to let us know if we can move any of these vote items to a consent agenda or not, which would create a lot of space for more generative dialogue. But I guess I'm just wondering if there's any value in sort of assessing the council for what's top of mind that we would like to have more conversations around.
Thank you. Anybody else right now? All right, well, good, thoughtful engagement and much more to come. Now we will move to the Affordable Rental Housing Division presentation, and Director Natasha Detweiler-Dobby.
Thank you, Chair Hall, Council, Director Bell. It's nice to be with you here today. This is Natasha Detweiler-Dobby, Affordable Rental Housing Division. And I think I want to, just in terms of public comment, I have a topic later about our NOFA funding process, so we'll unpack that a little bit further and provide also response to for my insight on the feedback provided. And our Milepost 5 update is posted, and we will, as Director Bell said, follow up on those specific asks of process clarification. And so now we have, I'm excited to have Michael Parkhurst, our preservation program program manager, provide he's come to you a couple times with the preservation framework and has provided the final draft in the packet, and we'll walk through a brief presentation to cover where we are.
Great. Thank you, Chair Hall, Director Bell, and members of the council. My name is Michael Parkhurst. I use he, him pronouns, and I am the Preservation Program Manager, as Natasha mentioned. I am here to give you a very brief refresher on the Affordable Housing Preservation Strategy Framework and ask for adoption today. As a quick reminder of the broad timeline, we started this work last fall. We did extensive outreach with many, many partners active in preservation from all different aspects of preservation, lenders, developers, consultants, and started to develop a draft. We shared a draft with you in May and then again in June, where we had a little bit more time to talk about your questions and comments. We've incorporated those in a final version we're bringing back to you today. And then I just want to affirm that we definitely see this as a living document that we will update over time. We're continuing to learn and adapt. It's not just for putting a bow on it and putting it on a shelf. Quick refresher on this purpose and scope of this. Really, I think one of the main things is to articulate a really clear rationale for sustained investment in affordable housing preservation. Also really defining for folks, what do we mean by preservation? What's included under that? Sharing with folks the forecast that we see for the need over the next 10 plus years. Establishing some high level goals and priorities about how we're going to devote resources to preservation. And another really big picture important goal here is to help inform our partners who are making decisions about what to do with their properties as they reach preservation milestones or need urgent sort of infusions of capital to keep the properties affordable and habitable. The feedback we heard from council in June was generally really positive and agreed with the big picture focus and priorities presented in the framework. There were some good discussion on a number of points we heard around, could we have a stronger emphasis on BIPOC tenants and housing organizations that serve them and other vulnerable populations tenants? What are we learning about preservation that should be informing our current underwriting? Was a great question. And then there was a good discussion about other policy options to deliver longer affordability and essentially strengthen our hand in preservation conversations. And I recall Director Bell brought up a good comment about let's not construe risk as strictly financial risk. There are other categories of risk that we should attend to. So a lot of those were really ongoing policy conversations, I think. Didn't hear anything in June that really required major revisions to the document. So unsurprisingly, it looks a lot like what you saw before, with the exception that we had a design makeover from our excellent communications team. So really appreciate their work to make the document pretty. The changes that you'll see from the June draft are essentially we've updated the data on preservation needs. We included some updated information about what happened in the 2023 legislative session and tweaked language a little bit about expiring affordability. We leaned a little too much, I think, in the prior draft toward we're really focused on for-profit owned properties that are expiring. And that is a concern because we don't really know what their motivations are in terms of keeping properties affordable in the long term. But I think we needed to make it clear that we are also looking at public housing authority owned properties and nonprofit owned properties that are reaching expiring affordability restrictions. So with that, I've gone pretty fast, but you have seen this a couple of times. I'm happy to entertain any questions, comments, suggestions. If there are any revisions we need to make to the document before adoption, happy to consider that as well. Thank you.
All right, council members, questions, feedback on this? Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Chair Hall. I just want to appreciate the intentionality of the way this briefing and this project has moved forward. We've had, it's been a couple of cycles. We have a chance to see early, we got to talk, we got to see a mid, and we got to talk, and now we're seeing the final. And this process has been really helpful for me to both understand the nuance and the things that you all as, professional folks with expertise, and those of us who maybe don't have that to understand it. And I also appreciate that we, it gave us a chance to talk about it, engage in the process. So I just want to say thank you and much appreciation for the process. And I love the graphic design. So 2 thumbs up.
Other council feedback? Are we ready for a vote, please? Then, do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Thanks. And do we have a second?
Second.
And could we have a roll call vote now, please?
Thank you, Chair Hall. Councilmember DeFontorum.
Yes.
Councilmember Farrell.
Yes.
Chair Hall.
Yes.
Councilmember Lee.
Yes.
Councilmember Mena.
Yes.
Councilmember Rogers.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Yay. All right.
Great. Thank you so much. And express gratitude to our amazing team at OHCS for that beautiful graphic design. It made me feel happy. Okay, so next up, really excited to be bringing this new item forward with you. This is a new investment from the legislature in modular. It's a little bit of a different angle on our traditional way of, types of projects and investments that we are given to lead. And we really got explicit direction from the legislature around that this is resources with priorities to expand the impact of modular production across the state with a really strong desire to expedite the delivery of resources. So I'm going to leave it to Rick and Britt McLean on his team to guide us through the introduction of this item.
Thank you, Natasha, and good morning, Chair Hall, Director Bell, and council members. My name is Rick Ruzicka. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the Assistant Director of Planning and Policy in the ARH Division. I'm here with Britt McLean, as Natasha mentioned, who will introduce herself in a minute. We're here today to present our draft framework in an introductory capacity for the Modular Housing and Development Fund. As Natasha mentioned, these are 2023 legislative funds with a design towards getting these resources out into community as quickly as possible. As I mentioned, there's no action item today. The presentation is an introduction, but we have several questions for you at the end of the presentation. We'll capture feedback to this initial draft. We will return to council. The plan is to return to you in October to request approval of a finalized version of the draft. We will incorporate any feedback we have received from you with feedback that we received from a session earlier this week and synthesize that into our final document. And so with that, I'm going to turn this over to Britt McLean to provide you more detail. Britt?
Good morning, Chair Hall, Director Bell, and council members. For the record, my name is Britt McLean. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm an operations and policy analyst in the Affordable Rental Housing Division here at OHCS. Staff have been hard at work at crafting the initial framework we've brought you today in an area of work that is really new to the agency. The initial draft framework is the result of an analysis of legislative intent, engaging with stakeholders and partners, and consulting with state agencies and other organizations that administer business development programs. We think it's important to note that this program is fairly different from what affordable rental housing has traditionally received legislative investment to administer, notably awarding funds that support economic development of a very specific industry, in this case with the intent to spur expansion in modular housing here in Oregon. The Modular Housing Development Fund is a provision of House Bill 2001 and House Bill 2889 from the 2023 Oregon legislative session, creating a new one-time $20 million modular housing industry development grant program to begin or expand production capacity. Legislative sponsors identified 3 categories of housing demand that recipients of the funds must prioritize, which are outlined in the bill in this order. 1, state and local governments across Oregon after a natural disaster. 2, low-income housing. And 3, moderate-income housing. We propose awarding roughly $5 million among 4 grantees. Based on our conversations with stakeholders, the framework proposes eligible uses like increasing manufacturing footprint, purchasing a specific piece of equipment, standardizing home or component design, developing infrastructure, enhancing transportation methods, and enhancing materials and technology. Our scoring panel will award points to applications based on projected output, how firms plan to prioritize demand categories, readiness for the investment, equity and racial justice commitment within the firm, expected impact to the industry, and other considerations. As business development is a new area of work for the agency, we're working to embed the agency's equity and racial justice commitments as we program these dollars in a different way. House Bill 2001 does not include explicit required outputs, with the exception of those prioritized demand categories. We're currently working through the agency's Racial Equity Analysis Tool, or the REAT, to help ensure this program meets our agency's commitments. In order to align this work with our goals and commitments, we will require applicants to sign our diversity and equity inclusion agreement and describe how grantees will implement this to meet their commitments. This will be a scored section of the application. We actually have a question at the end of this presentation for council to explore this piece a little bit further. We have heard loud and clear that timely award of these funds is critically important to our legislative partners. The draft framework we've brought you today is an attempt to balance speed of delivery with careful, thoughtful stewardship of these public funds.
We believe we've struck that balance between actionable, measurable goals and outcomes with enough freedom for firms to propose creative approaches to expand their industry. We just held our last stakeholder meeting this Wednesday, so while the current framework you have right now does not reflect the most recent round of feedback, we will review it and combine it with any additional direction we receive from council today. And we will include that in our final draft of the framework that we plan to bring back to you in October. So finally, we have a few questions for council consideration, but I think we're happy to answer any questions that council has first before we move to those questions, or we can jump right in.
What's the council's preference? Well,
Okay.
let's jump right in then.
Jump right in, great. So the first question, are there criteria beyond those outlined in the framework that council believes would tie in and ensure the agency's diversity, equity, and inclusion and racial justice commitments?
Council? Sorry about that, Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Chair Hall. So I've got a couple of questions, and I appreciate that since this is new territory that we are engaging in, I'd like us to be a little more bold, and I'm thinking about these early things about what the risk is. So we will be using our MWESB goals and priorities with applied to this project as well. So that's one question. And two is, I wonder if we shouldn't be making some bigger goals around percentages of this funding going towards either organizations, businesses that are minority, emerging, women-owned businesses, and or particularly serving or intending to serve or have served with their current business communities of color. I think this is a lot of times it's easier for organizations or larger organizations and people that have been doing a lot of this work to get in there. And because this is a new place, let's set the foundation now that says, while we have a sense of urgency to get the money out the door, we want the money out the door, not necessarily to go to the usual suspects or the people who have the most opportunity to easily and rapidly respond, which means slowing down a little bit and saying, where are we really going to offer developmental access to the funds, not technical assistance in that way. I mean, we should always be offering technical assistance, but sometimes I worry that we offer technical assistance in lieu of actually getting access to the money by the organization or the entity. And so I'd love for us to set some larger goals about how this is going to be allocated in alignment with actual racial justice and equity commitments.
Councilmember Lee, I think I'll talk about your first question first, the MWESB. We really tried to think through how to apply our MWESB goals to this program, but because there are no required number of homes to be produced, we thought it was difficult to apply those performance goals in this way, because the funds are really, the eligible uses are really for things like increasing a warehouse or buying a specific piece of equipment, and the output is more of a projection based on the investment. So we're really scratching our heads on how to apply contractor, subcontractor requirement co-bid firms within this investment. We're certainly all ears if there's a way to do that, but because there's no guaranteed number of homes to be built after this investment, it really is for the investment really is for production capacity expansion. We just thought it was a little trickier to try to apply that. That's why we went with the diversity, equity, and inclusion agreement that lays out several points for internal workforce development, sort of internal operations of a firm. So that's kind of why we went that route. But again, we're all ears. And Rick, please let me know if I missed
Yeah, I'll just jump in and say, traditionally the money goes to a kind of a development person who hires a general contractor who hires a bunch of subs to create housing. And so there's a flow of money and they're hiring a bunch of different firms to help them build the housing. In this particular case, they may not be hiring anybody. The money may go specifically to a piece of equipment. And so that's why we thought scoring was the best way to handle that, in terms of them telling us how they're going to meet that within their industry, how they're going to meet that within their partnerships, and really putting the scoring category front and center. But we're open to, we just didn't know how to do it. So that's why there's no MWESB tied to this.
I think I want to add just one more.
Okay, and then I'll jump in.
Before you respond, Councilmember Lee. I think what the team is struggling with is that our performance goals are ordinarily tracked with what happens after we fund. And I think it is true, but I do think the lens of, are you an MWSB production facility, or are you a culturally specific organization that is doing that is, and I think that is aligned with the scoring and the framework as intended. It's just the use of that as a long-term performance goal that is challenging. And I think as we have talked about this, and especially as they're working through the REIT process, looking at firms, both are they minority owned? Are they a COVID certified firm? Are they a culturally specific organization is one lens. And then the idea that these equity plans that they put in is about workforce development. Who are they seeking to grow in their workforce and their ownership structure and in their partnership? So I think it's just a different angle than our traditional MWSB strategy.
Sure. And the description makes me even, we're trying to buy resources that increase the capacity of organizations to do our development work. There's even more reason that we focus, I'm going to say exclusively on culturally specific, and as a secondary place, culturally responsive. That I know the MWSB designation is a fraught one, right? It is not an easy way it's not easy to get through. It doesn't always get us the right organizations. And that was my shorthand language around it. However, given that we're trying to build capacity, we should only be building capacity with this resource. I'm saying it. 2, organizations, community-based developers, whatever they want to, however we want to identify them, that are by, for, and about Black, Indigenous, and people of color, businesses, communities, future residents, all of those kinds of things. And I would say for me, the DEI agreement is completely inadequate. We ask people to sign it all the time. I'm not sure what we ever hear back from people. They give us every commitment. And maybe this is going to question 2, so I'll stop because I know my colleagues want to say some things as well. But using the DEI, the willingness to sign the DEI agreement doesn't feel heavy, responsive enough for me. Thanks.
Chair Hall, looks like you're on mute.
Sorry, Councilmember Nickelberry Rogers. Councilmember Mania.
Sorry, I was talking and I was on mute.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. I figured okay, we'll go to you and then to Councilmember Mania, Councilmember Farrell.
Okay, so I understand that this is a new line of funding, and I too feel like there needs to be something done in addition to just having them sign a form so that they can get the funding. I'm also a little concerned about wanting to get the funds out quickly. So yes, I heard in the presentation that you've tried to strike a balance, and I hope that happens. But I also like education, and I'm just going to throw this out as far as how we might be able in the scoring to say that they, in addition to signing the agreement, they need to partner with some other type of communities of color to bring them on board to be part of the application process. I know this one is difficult because it's more equipment based, but I just feel like there's an opportunity still to partner with other communities of color and how you might go about putting together this sort of grant to apply for funding. But I'm not sure how you might be able to include that in the scoring process. Thank you.
Councilmember Mania.
Thank you, Chair Hall. Just a couple comments, or actually a question. One is the comment is on the DEI. I think to the point that was taken, I think that a joint venture component would be a good opportunity, specifically for the manufacturers being able to connect with smaller minority manufacturers that can get into the game, and I think that will help to whatever degree that may be doable. And the question that I have is in terms of modular, does that include? I read the definition that was there, but I wasn't sure if that included like 3D printing type of development, or is there a limit to that?
Councilmember Mena, I'm happy to answer the second one. I think 3D printing would be included if it still conformed with the state building code's definition of prefabricated, which is the term that they use for residential modular. So I think that would be included. And in fact, if a facility, if a firm wanted to purchase equipment to do 3D printing so that they could print on the spot, there's some really innovative, cool things that the industry is doing. And that would be something that we think would be eligible for these funds if they wanted to buy that piece of equipment that would essentially allow them to have a mobile factory. They could go to a site after a wildfire event and print something on site. So that would be an exciting use of these funds for sure.
Okay. Councilmember Farrell.
Thank you, Chair Hall. My comment just kind of piggybacks off of Councilor Member Lee's on more than just check the box that we have these commitments to DEI and racial justice, but like evidence of, and that could include policies, that could include monitoring, that's seeking out, have complaints been filed, how are they resolved, and what is the process for which, like how are you demonstrating beyond just checking a box that the commitment was made? And so that would just be my input there.
Councilmember DeFontoura.
Thank you, Chair Hall. So I would echo what Councilmember Lee and Farrell raised up in terms of data collection. When people say that they're going to do certain things and funding applications, how do we know that they're actually doing them and meeting the goals set out by the council and by the agency? And I also need to lift up, and I don't know that I have a specific suggestion on how to incorporate this, but try they're distinct. While I understand we are included in the definition of BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, persons of color, communities of color, there's a political distinction with a federally recognized tribe. And I think that we have to capture that somehow when we start kind of delving into this deeper. I appreciate the work very much, and I appreciate everybody's comments. But that's the one that I would lift up today, along with how do we know that people are actually doing what they say they're going to do in these applications? And we've talked about it, you know, for a couple of years now. And I'm sure that Director Bell probably has an answer for this, because I imagine they are collecting this data, but that would be interesting to know at some point when people say that they're going to serve, are they actually serving? So anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember DeFentorum. I just want to talk a little bit, just kind of flag some things on the DEI agreement. In the coming months, we will be bringing forward a pretty robust update to the DEI agreement process. Knowing again, we're trying to move things forward. We have had this in place for a while and are doing a next evolution of that, with the idea of better tracking and accountability, and with the idea that it's not everybody meeting the same benchmarks at the same time, but that you're showing direction and movement along that spectrum. So staff in partnership with our Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Office have been working to do a significant revamp of that. We are, I'll be touching on it in our next agenda item, but that is part of one of our upcoming engagement sessions to talk through that with our development community to get their feedback. Again, this is a different audience in this modular production facilities, but I also think that is a connection back as well. And so I think I know that has we've lived in that place of signing a DEI agreement for long enough, and we're ready to turn that page, and really excited to bring that forward and elevate that work.
So Brett, I think we're ready for question 2.
Great. So the second question we have for council consideration are what considerations does council have as we expand into economic development, this economic development program? What type of reporting requirements would demonstrate accountability in the event that this is not one-time funding, that the agency is asked to continue to do economic development work? Are there things we should keep in mind if should that happen?
Councilmember Nickelberry Rogers.
Yes, so we've been talking about it as far as, they checked the box. How do we know that they did what they said they were going to do? So I think part of the reporting, we go back, talk with them and have them give us a report of what they did. I think we also need to consider whether or not, and maybe this is a DOJ question, but this is what our expectations were. You didn't meet what you said you were going to do, and as a result, you need to pay us back X amount of dollars, or you'll have to wait a year or 2 years before you can be part of the process again, because until companies or agencies understand that, no, you can't just check the box, we're going to give you the money and we'll see you next time, wink, wink. So yeah, we have to hold them accountable. Thanks.
Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Chair Hall. As we think about in this new way that we're using housing development funds as an economic development overt program, I'm thrilled about that. You likely have already done this, and I am interested in, there are a few culturally specific economic development organizations, collaborations across the state. I would love to see how we could invite those, sort of more traditionally economic development, business development, minority, people of color organizations and coalitions to help us think this through and really be full partners in it. I mean, maybe there are some of the people who are joining the ratings panels. Maybe they are some of the people who offer some pieces of accountability. Maybe they've got different insight into what economic development in a more purely traditional role looks like. And I'd love to see them not just invited to give us their feedback, but actually invited in to be co-partners with us. And if that means we need to resource their participation, I believe we should resource them to participate, because let's be clear, all of our organizations are asking communities of color to get in on everything, right? And we are not compensating people for that wisdom and for that expertise. And while many communities will choose to do it because they don't have another choice, I think we should invite in and we should compensate for that wisdom that we are trying to take advantage of for our own purposes and our own programs. I am wondering about the ability to share learning with others. And again, I'm thinking about this all in terms of points, right? So all of my comments are like, maybe someone gets another point versus someone who doesn't have it, right? But the ability to, and the willingness to share their learning with others. So if we're doing some development or some exploration or testing funding, I'd love for there to be a way for that learning to come back. Right. So we talk about the 3D printing, and that's a new piece of this environment, and not everybody's doing it. If we found someone to do that, can we have some expectations that they will come back and share with us and others in the field what they've learned? Now, I get if someone's just expanding their existing capacity for a known technology, maybe that's not, as interesting to people. However, if we get the kind of new, interesting things that we're hoping to get, I'd like the learning to be broader than that one organization. And then the last thing I would say is there a way to privilege smaller businesses versus larger businesses, so that we look at the size of the earnings or the organization, or, I'm talking in nonprofit terms. So we look at the size of the organization's budget. Can we give priority to those organizations that are smaller rather than those that are larger? And I realize there are, economies of scale at a larger place and all those things, but the larger organizations have greater capacity to access resources than the smaller ones do. And given our conversations about what we're hoping who we're hoping to work with here, I'd love for us to maybe give some extra points or some consideration to the size of the business. Thanks.
Any other council comments on this question? I guess we'll move on then.
Okay, last question. Are there any potential eligible or ineligible uses that the current draft framework does not include?
Anybody? Well, I'm seeing a couple of heads shaking. So I guess the answer is an apparent no.
Thank you very much. Thank you for all the feedback. Really appreciate it. Appreciate the time today.
Oh, you're welcome. Okay.
Great.
So does this wrap up the division's presentation?
We've got one more, Chair Hall.
Okay, great. Yep, thank you.
Yeah, and you'll have the pleasure of me chatting here.
All right.
So I think I am sharing my screen. Natasha Detweiler Davy, Director of Affordable Rental Housing. And so I just want to follow up on the memo provided in the packet and the comments provided in public input today around the NOFA engagement and reform process. So I think I'll walk through the process and then enter into the different conversations that we heard some input on today. I just provided the bulk of this in the memo. I think just regrouping on why it is that we are doing and entering into this engagement. It is both to be in alignment with the governor's executive order 2304 to expedite and expand delivery of housing across Oregon to better meet the needs. The scale of resources allocated in this biennia to OHCS and affordable rental housing to deploy is at least double what we have ordinarily received. And so in conjunction with a lot of constraint in some places in terms of tax credits and others, we also have a lot of significant resources to make sure that we're strategically invested to really make an impact and be deployed into the state, across the state, as soon as is possible to move forward with them. And then we want to streamline the process that by which funds are requested. And I think the little bar chart on the bottom here, I just think is illustrative of the scale of this increase, biennia to biennia. This is kind of continuing this upward trajectory. And our current process right now that you all have been, seeing cohorts of NOFA awards come through has been a funding calendar where each offering is structured to be able to meet one policy objective, essentially, or a handful of policy objectives. So we have a PSH-specific application process, a veteran-specific application process, a preservation-specific offering process ×3. And so I think as we were looking at this funding process over time, we have folks constantly in the state of opening, processing, and closing applications, seek over and over and over again. And that's a lot of internal work and kind of a place of unintentional but impactful differences in process as different teams are owning those different bodies of work. But it also becomes incredibly difficult to navigate from the outside. How in the world to be really clear about which resource offering is the best situated for you? And I think there's a lot of pieces of movement in all of that, and I'll try to talk through how that works. I think Director Bell, in setting up in her messages this morning, did a lovely job of summarizing all of the different kind of prolific amount of resources that we have. We have new legislative investments to support a large allocation of Article 11Q bonds to support the LIFT project and permanent supported housing, preservation investments, new resources, gap funding specifically dedicated to serving ag workers. We have new pre-development funds, and so that is relevant as we hear feedback about where we move the dial on readiness. That has impact to pre-development funds, especially for culturally specific and small organizations. We have resources to be able to address that need. And that was new allocations from the legislature, new loan guarantees, as well as the really wide list of existing programs that our division works on and operates to support housing development across the state. As we're kind of entering into this work, I wanted to keep central to this that we need to be responsive to the market conditions. Though we are affordable housing, housing and finance works in the world of the market. We have seen over the last several years, of course, lots of cost volatility, continuing cost escalation in insurance markets, in interest rate markets. That means that between the time when a project applies for resources and to when they're ready to close and begin construction, the cost picture is completely different, and we're finding projects with those gaps at the closing table. And you have been privy and part of having to approve those, finding we had an incredible $50 million legislative investment to support that market cost offset process. And then otherwise, we've been digging through the couch cushions as avidly as possible to try to make sure that everything that we could possibly do to make sure that we could be helpful in getting projects across that finish line could happen. But that is not sufficient, and that is not a predictable structure for developers. And I think the arguments then start to go, well, let's just set up an ongoing program that is to address the last minute funding gaps. that process then negates all of the scoring, all of the priorities, all of the work that went into there. If what you are agreeing to fund on the front end ends up having very different costs or very different subsidy needs when you're actually finalizing that, it's not doing a predictable, it doesn't provide the developer the predictable access to resources, and it doesn't make sure that we're making the right policy decisions on the front end as we are choosing, using scoring to determine what projects are going to be prioritized for resources. We also want to make sure that we can set clear and consistent performance and accountability, centering equity and racial justice in the same expansive way across all programs. There's no reason, as far as I'm concerned, to have a different equity bar in one resource with one flavor of money versus another, right? That has been part of how we have evolved and really stepped into prioritizing and centering our investments on equity and racial justice. And it's time to flip that page and say this needs to be across all of them. And I don't think that all of it has been inconsistent, but there has been expanded focus in some programs and not others, but that this is the opportunity to recast those overall. And so the objectives here is, again, like I pointed out, to say, going from a place of having upwards of, 10, 15 different application processes in a year to have a centralized application portal where anything that is applying for resources would come through one application. So it would have consistent parameters. There might be, if it's a permanent supportive housing project, you would have questions specific to that permanent supportive housing, but the rest of the application would look the same as it would for a veterans project or a workforce project. We're working to stand up navigation support and technical guidance. The legislature approved a proposal to add staff to our division to be able to have this deliberate externally facing technical advisor role. And that has been long missing from our agency in our division for these resources. And so, sometimes people will call the program analyst or production analyst to get kind of thoughts and feedback, but it's inconsistent and it's not, available broadly. And making sure that you're having a core team that is trained to give the right directionality and expertise and feedback, or pulling the right folks into that conversation. So I think that is something that we can better do if we're having a team that is really specifically dedicated to doing that really proactive engagement and providing early pipeline support to make sure that folks are thinking about how the resources work in the right way and what that timing looks like, and making sure that we can be really making sure to be putting project concepts together that will be successful. And the idea that when they are submitting their application, it won't end up falling flat because of an accidental oversight of some fundamental part of how a home program works, or how some of these state or federal requirements work for resources. We again we have a large amount of resources to deploy. We want to deploy those strategically, and it's not a open bank account thing. We're not saying let's give the money to all comers, but that we want to make sure that we are building this pipeline of projects that are able to move forward, are doing the work of balancing partnerships and cost and working in community to make sure that these are going to be successful. Part of that is, lessening that risk of funding gaps. So again, from right now, we make our NOFA awards upwards of a year to sometimes 2 years before a project is able to start construction. That means that there's a potentially 2-year gap between that first budget that we approved, as that subsidy ask was based on, and when they're starting construction. And so yesterday we did have our engagement that was focused on readiness to proceed. And part of where we went out and said, we want our final funding commitments to be 6 months out from closing. But I think a couple, need to acknowledge this is a dramatic impact to our sponsors and our development community. And I don't want to short shrift that. I also think it's the whole picture together that makes this work and will make this make sense. And again, that was a starting point to a conversation. We are engaging in earnest, and so really excited to have all of the feedback as passionate as possible as it is expressed, but that, what is the realistic timeline that we can get to? And if we're giving final funding commitment, something closer to 6 months out, what are the earlier commitments that we can provide that let you do all of the things that you would otherwise need? And then we lock down the dollars closer, like when you have that ready budget or much more of that due diligence accomplished. And so I think that there are a lot of different models that we have been examining. We shared some yesterday, or Ty Dunson Strain shared several other state approaches to prioritizing readiness. I think you all have been engaged already in our readiness conversation related to our 4% tax credits, where we have pretty significantly pivoted those, basically between when we are giving that final award of the 4% credit, it is essentially now a 6-month calendar to closing. So there's some examples of where we have some space to make there. And I also just will acknowledge and understand in response to all of the feedback and conversation yesterday, and I think we're aware of this, that there needs to be another step to the process before that final funding commitment. And I think a new centralized application really will let us do that. And it is going to be the work of kind of blending the mix. And so the more details that everybody can be providing us about what the needs are, the better situated we'll be. I will also, in just a minute, kind of talk through our other engagement, which I think will help support that we are trying to look broadly to get all of that input brought into it. The other piece of this that we heard is, if this costs $2 million or $5 million before we are ready to go. We do have an existing land acquisition program that could be used to purchase properties. And we have a new program to stand up to support pre-development. We had a $9.7 million investment from the legislature. Clearly, $9.7 million is not going to be enough to give every project $5 million to be successful, although that would be different. But it is enough. It is enough to be incredibly impactful and demonstrate proof of concept if we are funding projects, small, culturally specific organizations that would not have access to resources to incur those costs otherwise. So I think that is, again, a next conversation for our public engagement, and one where really getting that understanding and the dial on readiness was needed first in kind of rolling all of these out. Another objective here is to increase clarity and consistency of requirements and performance and to policy objectives. We are, looking, again, I think I talked about how we would be able to have a core perspective on equity and racial justice that applies to all of them. We will be standing up an organizational pre-qualification stage so we can be really clear with organizations. Do they have the expertise and experience to be able to do development? And that will be an opportunity for us to flag capacity resources. So are there, we noticed this about your organization's pre-qualification application, and kind of work to align our capacity resources to step in there where we see that where there might be a need. I also think that is the place where we will have the diversity, equity, inclusion agreement rolled out and tied, focusing on organizational work. Is that, so there's both the work in the buildings and then there's the work of the organizations. And so I want to make sure that we are moving both of those dials forward. And then including other incentives in our scoring structure or resource structure that drives to performance and above and beyond at minimum. I guess I have a hard time saying minimum expectations because I don't think we set a bar low. I think we set a strong bar that needs, that to be able to be eligible, you need to be performative in so many different areas. I thought in kind of walking this through, just it would be helpful to do this, provide this graphic picture of the development timeline. This is, from initial project concept to construction is often a 5-year process. So this is not decide a thing today and go get funding for it tomorrow. And so that readiness piece is really like, where in the mix of this 5-year timeline do we provide our final funding reservation? And so right now we have a place where we're relatively early. There's a lot of diligence. This doesn't have all of the layers of diligence I layered over. There's a lot of diligence right now that happens, again, kind of at this step. So, with another 1 to 2 or even 3 years before the construction closing that needs to happen. And so if we can do a preliminary and early kind of stage of an application, and then have that, again, that's the final funding commitment that would be closer to the time when we had more true read of costs and financial needs to projects. And then just step into the engagement side of this. We had yesterday our engagement on readiness to proceed. We kicked this whole engagement process off a couple weeks before that. We have these broad engagement sessions scheduled for the next several months, every other week. And so you can see in the table, next week will be next session, mid-September, we'll be talking about pre-development. Aside from these core conversations of broad developers, we'll be having specific focus group conversations, working to schedule a convening with other public funders to make sure that we can identify ways that we can be in alignment and limiting the amount of disconnect between public funders putting their resources to projects that require state resources to be complete. I know that we're working with our tribal housing liaison to make sure that we are linking with tribal community. We have ongoing conversations with Roberto Franco, our Assistant Director of Development Resources and Production, leads regular conversations with culturally specific development partners, and I think we'll be trying to use some of those spaces to have engage in this specific conversation, but surely we'll open to standing up others. Some of the early feedback from engagement sessions was a potential need for a specific rural conversation. And I have been working to schedule a conversation with lenders as well to make sure to have those input. So I think there's a broad swath of those really focused conversations. I will say in the meetings themselves, we are providing early materials. So the week, several days before, we're providing background materials that we will be using in that conversation, so folks can be thinking about it ahead of the meeting, ahead of the engagement. We have then in the actual engagement, we go through a presentation, kind of regrouping, answering any big questions about understanding what we're talking about. And then generally we're structuring so that we go into smaller group breakout sessions to really dig in on key questions that we're flagging, and get folks to be able to provide input to us verbally and conversation in those, be able to provide it in writing in those conversations through a web board. And then we're also following up after the meeting with surveys, and then at the end also synthesizing all of the information that we get and posting that as well. This is a snapshot of our engagement website. So we are putting both, so as we're having meetings, we're providing the agenda, the presentation, the recording, any synthesis that we're doing, and any links to being able to provide the survey. So really, again, I think engaging in earnest, really trying to make sure that we are clear and transparent and this information is accessible. Surely not everybody is going to be able to show up every other Thursday at 10 a.m. And so wanting to make sure that all of that is recorded and available to folks that need to catch up at another point in time. I don't want to pretend this is a big lift. This is a very complicated series of topics. All of these changes, I think, as we heard in public comment, there are implications. Any change has intended consequences and unintended consequences. And so really, I think we as a team are really believe and understand that getting more input into the process will help anticipate some of those unintended consequences so that we can navigate those as proactively as possible. I also think that we need to be committed to continuing to evaluate and revise as we go. So if we are finding that the impact is not what we are driving toward in terms of consistent standard, clear navigation, and deploying resources into community, that is something that we'll want to make sure to keep an eye toward, and we'll be putting some performance measures and reports into place around that as we get going. But again, we're wanting to really use this process to anticipate and navigate all of that. So again, this is meaty. This is, something that we are will be bringing every month to Housing Stability Council. I do think, I think in the world of consideration of topics that council might want to dig into and spend some real generative time discussing, I would really adore that opportunity, because I think it feels like there just is a lot to unpack, and I think it will be really helpful to really have those tough conversations with you directly and in conversations. And so really, I think that's my overview at this point in time. Interested in any feedback on what you heard today from either public testimony or this engagement process, and in particular, what is going to be most helpful for Housing Stability Council as we are bringing these topics forward to you, to make sure that we are getting you the best information to be able to really engage and give input and direction to us as we take on this work.
All right, Councilmember Mena.
Thank you, Chair Hall. Natasha, thank you. That is a great summary. I think an ongoing engagement and an ability to make the resources available more on an ongoing basis and more consistent, it makes sense. I will again repeat my concern that I said this morning in terms of I'm just thinking of projects that we fund at the city of Beaverton and what it takes, and the amount of not only our partner developers, but also the city from staffing, from costs associated that the city has to invest to be able to get to a point where at least there is some guarantee that there are resources coming from the county, from the state. It is a big ask, a big pull, and to then not be able to, having to wait much longer, it adds to the cost, as we all know. And so that's a big concern, and I greatly appreciate the fact that we'll continue to have these conversations. There'll be engagement with local jurisdictions that I think you will hear different concerns. But I understand the work, and I understand it's difficult, and I understand that we have to do things differently in order to be able to bring up and create what is needed for those in need. So tough work ahead, and more than happy to continue to engage and really appreciate your work.
Councilmember DeFontorum.
Oops. Thank you, Chair Hall. Lower my hand. Okay, give me 1 minute, okay?
Oh, okay.
Oh, sorry.
Buddy, look on the second shelf.
Sorry, grandson in the background.
Yes.
So I would add to the comments from this morning on the requirement to close within 6 months from the date of award. Just as a practical matter, that is asking for not just a time investment, there's also a significant amount of resources that have to be invested to have a development project. At that point, well, those are chocolate covered almonds. To the grandson, not to the council. Yes. So I know for us, when we do development, depending on what you're doing, you're probably looking at least $500,000 in design contracts, right? And that's a lot of time, that's a lot of money. Before you ever do the application, as I understand it, that would be the new requirement, that you have to have all of this ready in the queue when you do your application so that you can close in 6 months. I would just encourage looking at that again, because that's a pretty big lift financially and time-wise with no guarantee on return. So I just want to raise up that one comment, and thank you very much.
I appreciate that, Councilmember DeFontorum. Yes, I think understanding the true costs of that work, and I think that is a place, especially like the $500,000 for design, is something that the pre-development resources could be used to cover those upfront costs. And then I think, you know, as we keep kind of circling in different strategies and conversations, it feels like where we need to land this is that where we have an early vetting process that gives enough surety that if you meet these benchmarks or do XYZ, that you would be able to access it. And again, like the idea that when we are bringing a funding recommendation, a dollar value to it, that we need that to be the real one. I think that's the big thing. And so, you know, if we can, and we have resources to give a lot of resource certainty on our gap funding side, at least, because tax credits is another constrained place for us. But I think that place, and so I appreciate that input, and I think it is incumbent on us to have a strategy that addresses that concern.
Hey, Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Chair Hall. Just a couple of comments. So one is, I want to say I'm in support of the intention that we're trying to go here, the portal, the single application, those kinds of things, consistency and regularity so that people can plan. Those all seem to be right in alignment with our values. I think, you know, where we're at, and Natasha, as you have said to us, is what's the impact, right? And how we answer and walk into those intentions and values is where we're going to have to do some messy sausage making. So I'm confirming that we've made no decision yet. We're floating up a bunch of different ideas as we go through the stages of engagement, and the final decision about how we're going to meet the intentions that we've talked about is yet to be made. So you're nodding your head, Natasha, is that right?
Yes, I mean, I think that there is, we have to provide an update that prioritizes getting resources to community, and that addresses the disconnect of our ad hoc NOFA process. How we do that, how we meet that is up for question and engagement.
Great. So we still have time to think about some of the questions that council members have raised about and the community about timeline, et cetera, et cetera. I wonder, as we go further into this discussion, it would be helpful to me to just see once we start to land places, right? So if we're going to change, you know, issue A, some articulation of what the potential consequences or impact of that decision, right? So we want to have, you know, one golden application that everyone can go into. If that's the decision, what are some potential consequences, both positively, maybe it's impacts instead of what are the impacts of having made that decision? And that would be, I think, much further down the line in the process, but it would be helpful for me to see if we do this, we think this is the kind of impacts both that our own staff has assessed and that we've heard from our partners and in engagement pieces. So as a future piece, that would be helpful for me. And I'm also wondering about, are there any requirements related to legal sufficiency that we have to engage with before we make a final decision, or how we engage with that, so we don't go far down and then DOJ says, nope, can't do that, can do this. And you don't need to answer that now, but I'm curious, and I am curious because it seems like in the last couple of decisions, we've gotten over months, right? We've gotten into a place where we thought we were going in one direction, and then DOJ said, nope, we're going in this direction. And so if we could have some information about where that's going, that would be helpful. And then finally, I would love to have a more in-depth, open conversation about this with the council. And I know, Chair Hall, we've asked ourselves, what are the issues that we'd like to dive into or spend some more time on? This would certainly be one of those places, because I think it touches so much. I mean, really, once we get this in place, it's going to impact everything we're doing with our affordable housing development. So thank you.
Council Member Farrell. Want to make sure I'm not missing anybody else's.
Sorry, I was on mute.
Oh,
And we're all
okay.
guilty of that today,
Yep.
Friday.
All right. Go
My
ahead.
comment is a little more general, and it's really just in regards to that second prompt on how to best provide information. I guess my thought is that sometimes, I'll just speak for myself, sometimes when prompts are given to us in these meetings that are sort of led with, what is your very specific feedback to this question? I often feel very limited to giving my response and feedback to that question. And sometimes I think what is missing is open dialogue. And I realize in a public meeting that is something we want to have some structure and not just free flow for, a long period of time. So I understand the balance there to be concise and impactful with our time. But I do sometimes think what's missing in these feedback sessions is just discussion, because sometimes we don't know exactly what the feedback we would give is unless we asked other questions or just had more open dialogue. And then that leads to an enhanced understanding of where we would give feedback. So if there is an opportunity to have some sort of controlled environment for just less pointed questions, but open discussion, even if it's timed, that might be helpful for me. I don't know about the rest of the counselors.
Yeah, Chair Hall, if I may just add one very quick and brief comment.
Yes.
Thank you. I appreciate that feedback, Councilmember Farrell, and I think there's been some continuity to that, both in some of the areas of feedback you've offered, but then also I think some emerging and pretty consistent themes from the council at large. I would just note that any time that we have, whether we consider it to be a work session even within the kind of newer understanding and clarity from DOJ that we're receiving, there's an abundance of opportunity to engage in an unstructured format. So I think as we engage in this conversation or the many other topics that the council has elevated as needing some more expansive dialogue, that is the time of the council. That is not just staff time, that is also time of the council. And so we can definitely be responsive to ensuring that there's structure to the conversation as needed. And it can also be as light as, here's the topic and here's the information that we know, and let's get into a conversation. So I don't think we need to limit ourselves in terms of how we engage. I just think we need to engage by definition of the council. And I'm hearing, so I just want to name that so that we don't have to overwork it.
All right, anybody else at this point? Then I believe that wraps things up for Affordable Rental Housing's division. Thank you all. And now Housing Stabilization Division, Director Smith, are you and your team ready?
Hello, Chair Hall. Yes, I think we are all ready.
Okay.
Yes, we're all here.
The
I
floor
wanna
is yours.
say, Good morning, Chair Hall, Director Bell, and council members. I'm Jill Smith. I'm the Director of Housing Stabilization. I'm super excited to be here with you this morning and provide an update on the RAY program, Rent Assistance for Youth. It's been a while since we've talked to you about this, and a lot has happened. And we hope to continue to bring you updates. To kick this off, I do want to reiterate, this is just an update. It's informational only at this time. While we're happy to accept guidance and feedback, we aren't seeking a decision of the council. As a reminder, the RAY program was part of House Bill 2163. And the reason we're here today is it's actually a legislative requirement that we come to the council and provide an update in September of this year. So that is why the timing is as it is. And I just want to start out by making a statement that in Oregon, we do not accept homelessness as a fact of life. And the reality is far too many of our youth are living outside, as well as in unstable or undesirable situations. And the magnitude of this issue requires our state agencies and our local community leaders to bring solutions to the table. And with that, I wanted to say how fortunate we are to have a very wonderful community leader with us here today to co-present. The Executive Director of the Mid-Willamette Valley Community Action Agency, Jimmy Jones, is here. His agency is one of the 3 pilot programs for the RAY program. He's been deeply engaged in the implementation of this program and has agreed to share his experience with you. Following Director Jones' presentation, I will follow that with a few updates on the current state of RAY, and then we would love to open it up to your questions and comments. Director Jones.
Good morning, Chair Hall, Director Bell, Director Smith, and members of the council. Again, my name is Jimmy Jones. I'm the Executive Director of the Mid-Willamette Valley Community Action Agency here in Salem. I'm also a board member at the Oregon Alliance for Runaway and Homeless Youth. That's our statewide organization for advocacy and for policy direction around runaway and homeless youth issues. I'm very delighted to talk about our agency and our work that we've been doing at Community Action here in Salem for 20 years. We've had a runaway and homeless youth program. In addition to the state funds from OHCS and from Oregon Department of Human Services and from the Oregon Health Authority, we also operate a number of federal grants with regard to runaway and homeless youth services. From Health and Human Services, we have the Federal Street Outreach Grant, we have the Basic Center Grant, and we also operate a Youth Homeless Demonstration Project from HUD as well. So we've been doing this work for about 20 years. Here in Salem, we operate a drop-in center for runaway and homeless youth. We also operate what we call Taylor's House, which is the region's only overnight shelter for runaway and homeless youth that takes placements from the Department of Human Services and also has beds for street homeless youth. We operate as well, starting this month, second runaway and homeless youth shelter out in Polk County that we're calling Monmouth House. That will be an additional 10 beds for RHY populations in that particular community. So if we want to go on to the next slide, I think I saw some of the information there. So this is a little bit about the participation in the RAY program. I know there have been some concerns around the state and here with the council about the speed of the stand-up of this particular program. That's a combination of a lot of factors, really, product of new program design, some pretty restrictive legislative mandates that came along with the establishment of this program. Certainly the priorities that the department had and the provider community had to address COVID and the rental assistance that was just absolutely critical to get out the door to keep a wave of homelessness from spreading over Oregon. It would have been just too impossible to imagine if those thousands and thousands of households had not been served. It's also the product of some inherent differences between the adult work and the youth work in particular. I think a lot of times people in the community, people at the state sometimes really do not understand that this is an entirely different scope of work. There's another presentation that follows mine from folks who have a little bit more mental health background, and they can describe a little bit, I hope, some of the inherent differences in the adult work and the youth work. Those inherent differences are things that relate specific to youth homelessness that almost makes that work clinical in nature compared to standard housing work. There's a lot of trauma for RHY populations at a time when they are still developing their prefrontal cortex that essentially causes some extraordinarily risky behavior on the part of that younger population. Most of them that are coming to us for safety, for stability, for acceptance. And that requires relationship building. It requires trust in particular. Some of the stats you're about to see in a moment will demonstrate that there's extraordinary disparate impact for communities of color among RHY populations. And as a result of that fact and the vulnerabilities from those particular populations and from just the nature of youth homelessness at its core, what we see there is that it takes a lot of trust and relationship building, because many of those young folks have virtually no trust, justifiably so, for systems, for nonprofits, for government, for state agencies, for law enforcement, and on and on and on. There has been nothing in their lives that has demonstrated to them that they can have any trust and any sense of safety from these systems. So it requires a lot of work and a lot of relationship building. There's been, as you know as well, some provider reluctance around this program, I think, and that was part of OHCS's experience as they went out to look for folks who could do this work. It's, running an agency is also running a business. So some of that reluctance sort of centers around, can we get insurance coverage for this particular kind of work if it's new work? How much is that going to cost us? What are the liability and the risk around the program? And then as a service provider, I just want you to think for 1 second about the nature even of the name of the program. So the chartering legislation, House Bill 2163, required OHCS to construct a pilot project, a 2-year pilot project for long-term rental assistance. That's almost a contradiction in terms. Long-term rental assistance is usually something for folks who are going to need 3 to 5 to even 10 years worth of some kind of subsidy, case management, and a whole host of other services. You almost can't construct a 2-year pilot based on those assumptions. So a lot of providers around the state, even if they did have the capacity to stand this up and do it quickly, unless they were involved in the work previously, were a little bit troubled looking at the nature of this program, because there's good ethics that go into program design, housing folks, because if we can't assure that people have safety and security not to be abandoned on the back end, it's very hard for providers to go along and say, you know what, this is a good idea. We're going to go ahead and put people in housing, even though we don't necessarily know that those supports, those long-term supports that are necessary, are going to be there. So let's take a look at the slides here so don't get too far behind them. So this is our rate program participation so far. We have 7 youth housed. We currently have 1 youth seeking another unit. Landlord engagement in these particular programs is difficult. A lot of times there's reluctance and concern on the part of property companies or even private landlords to conclude lease agreements with younger folks, especially folks who have background issues that they'd be supported by RHY services. So there's some relationship building with the landlords that have to go along with that. And I would say that for 18 to 24-year-olds, that is, a barrier that we have a lot of history with and we can surmount. But in Oregon, and most people don't know this, 16-year-olds can actually rent an apartment. And we have a lot of 16-year-olds that are out there living on their own, bouncing from couch to couch in incredibly unsafe situations, who could profit from getting their own apartment. But landlords have been particularly sort of troubled around that concept that, in Oregon, you can get, an apartment at the age of 16. So we've got 7 housed, 1 looking. We have 10 more youth that are enrolled in services that are connected to this RHY program. And we have about 30 referrals coming in at the moment. And so those referrals are essentially critical. Partnerships with DHS, partnerships with the local school districts, partnerships with law enforcement, community corrections, a whole host of folks out there that are needed, and those relationships have to be built in order to make these kinds of programs successful. If we could go to the next slide, please. what you see here in terms of ethnicity and gender of the youth population in these long-serve programs is that, you know, there is a significant percentage of LGBTQ folks who identify as LGBTQ among this RHY population. And in fact, a lot of the original reasons that this population became homeless was struggles that they had with their own family, rejection by their family. They don't feel safe in those, you know, communities that they've been in before. So what you see is very high numbers of LGBTQ population among the RHY population. And that requires a whole host of different kinds of services with different kinds of partners and different kinds of referral mechanisms and different kinds of supports, and especially mental health supports that, you know, would be a little unusual in some cases for traditional adult housing programs. You're going to see an extraordinary number of BIPOC youth as well in terms of our street outreach program, which had about 42% Latinx street youth here in Salem. In terms of our drop-in, our day center, essentially 634 served there, about 36% were Latinx. You go through our street outreach program and you look at the percentages there for BIPOC groups, that's about 20%, another 20% at our drop-in. You know, this is a very common theme for us, and we have seen this for nearly 2 decades, that there's an extraordinary disparate impact for people of color among the youth homeless population. So let's jump to the next slide, please. This is Washington County, and Director Smith, did you have other folks who wanted you to cover Washington County?
Yes, Director Jones, go ahead and finish your remarks and I'll pick the slides up here.
So one of the other point that I just want to make is that the need is very real. A lot of times when programs begin in very slow and deliberate ways, there's questions at the legislature, there are questions from other external partners, there's questions from the community about whether or not the need is out there. Well, the need is out there. It's been well demonstrated for the last 20 years. It's very, very real. But there is also, it's incumbent upon OHCS, it's incumbent upon the providers to do this in a very well-designed, intentional way that is not rushed. And I appreciated the council's comments earlier in other sections of the meeting today about slowing down and taking your time and making sure that the right choices are being made, because there's a chance here to do extraordinary harm if this isn't done well, especially given the vulnerabilities among the youth population. And I would just sort of conclude, I think, again, by sort of going back to those earlier comments about, you know, what we're trying to do here is a little bit contradictory in one sense. So we are trying to design a 2-year program on 2-year support that's really geared toward long-term rental assistance as a pilot project. So that's an extraordinarily difficult thing to do. I know that there's general frustration that it hasn't gotten up off the ground more quickly, and that it hasn't produced perhaps yet the spend rates that folks had hoped. But given the nature of the work and how programmatically wildly different it is for youth versus adults, this is normal in terms of new program designs and stand up. And I really believe that the real test of this program will come over the next 2 years during the 23-25 biennium. We'll get a better sense as a state as to how this work can be done and what needs to be done specifically to bring more providers into this system so that we can have better statewide coverage than what we have right now. And we certainly need the council support for the department and for the provider community as we hope to seek more support from the legislature for long-term rental assistance in the future. So I just want to thank the council for the opportunity to talk a little bit about our work this morning and its support for runaway and homeless youth in Oregon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Director Jones, for being here and just sharing your agency's experience and expertise. It really has helped to inform our efforts as we've worked to stand this pilot up. And I want to correct the record. The concerns about spend down and faster program stand up have come from internal to OHCS. We recognize it hasn't come from the council. The council has encouraged us strongly to do this carefully, thoughtfully, and slowly. So I just want to put that on the record. And if we can go to that next slide, I just want to make sure that the council is aware of where our other partners are. The Washington County RAY program currently has 5 youth housed, 5 seeking a unit, and 10 enrolled in services. And they reported to us that through their coordinated entry system, they've got 366 youth that meet the requirements of the RAY program. So there's certainly no lack of need here. Next slide, please. This is the demographics only for the youth being served in the Washington County RAY program. We did not gather all of the demographics on those that were on the waiting list, but that's something that I would like to bring you in a future meeting. As you can see, Washington County shares that disparate impact of youth affected by homelessness. Next slide, please. Finally, I think that was our last slide. I just want to share with you that our third partner is NOHOB and the Northwest Oregon Housing Authority, in partnership with the CAAs that are on the coast. We were required to have three pilot areas by the statute. There had to be urban, rural, and coastal. And our coastal partnership has presented the most challenges for us. They all have had to be built and designed and have taken longer than staff thought they would. And we've learned a lot from that. And NOHA has not housed a youth as of yet. They are actively engaged with their partners. They are developing additional partners because there's 3 community action agencies that cover their service area: Tillamook, Clatsop, and Columbia. And they're actively engaged. There's youth identified and ready to be referred. The slowdown has been in a change of leadership linked to that agency that really stalled things. That has been corrected, and we feel pretty confident things will progress nicely, but time will tell. And we're watching that very closely and working very, very closely with them. That with that update, I just want to, in closing, just share with the council that the Housing Stabilization Division, we are so committed to this work, as are our partners, as you could tell from Director Jones's statements and his commitment to this work. We remain committed to launching long-term rent assistance for youth. We believe it's our collective responsibility for us to come together and solve the issues facing youth across all the regions of Oregon. Our investment in supporting young people experiencing homelessness helps to ensure they never become part of, the folks experiencing long-term chronic homelessness. It's an investment that's so important and critical. And we are here before you in hopes that you will support that desire as well. And Housing Stabilization Division wants to bring back updates on progress, and we hope to request a legislative, to bring a legislative ask for the next long session, seeking ongoing assistance for this program in hopes that it will be a truly long-term rent assistance program, rather than a pilot. And with that, I would love to hear from you. Your guidance would be greatly appreciated.
Sorry, I was muted. Councilmember Farrell.
Well, you knew I was going to have comments on this one. I really appreciate the presentation by Jimmy Jones. That definitely resonates with me as a fellow provider to unhoused youth. And I think that the challenge in all of this is multifold. One, I'm not surprised to see the numbers. That does not surprise me at all. The challenges that were identified in the early planning phases are very real throughout the state. And I think if you're going to talk about programs and services to ultimately end youth homelessness, you have to consider funding pre-housing services as well. So that sort of housing pipeline concept, there's a lot of stabilizing interventions that need to occur with this population, in addition to just getting them housed. You can't just sort of narrow it down to just getting them housed. There's a whole spectrum, and part of that is just the stabilizing. Kids move around a lot. So my encouragement would be to sort of broaden the definition of housing when it comes to youth, to include the sort of pre-housing level of supports and services. And I think it's hard to talk about programs that really just target unhoused youth without looking at the other programs throughout the state that fund services to the unhoused community at large. Many youth, as Jimmy Jones mentioned, end up on their own because of family dysfunction, abuse, neglect, but also true is that many, many, many more youth end up on their own at a young age because their whole entire family was experiencing homelessness. And so a teenager having the option to couch surf with friends versus sleep in a car or a single room hotel with additional family members, many young people will opt to couch surf, and that often puts them in a more risky situation. And one of the current challenges is that oftentimes programs that are attached to the formal HUD definition of homelessness, which is literally unhoused on the streets or in a shelter environment, sort of miss those families that are also unhoused, but not making it to a shelter, either because they're rural or because of their family size or their family makeup. Shelter isn't always the right fit. And they will often choose to stay in either doubled up or hotel environments versus being on the streets. And so the more we can prevent kids from separating from their families where there is a healthy dynamic and support that whole family, you will see less kids inherently on their own and in risky doubled up situations or couch surfing situations. So my ask is, as we look at programs for youth, to sort of broaden the conversation to all youth experiencing homelessness, not just youth that end up unaccompanied or on their own, because there's an opportunity here to really help stabilize the population at large of youth homelessness without sort of segmenting it down to just a portion of that population in just 3 communities and then just a pilot project with not enough money, not enough time, not enough resources. It's a much bigger conversation.
Thank you. Just in response to that, Council Member Farrell, I neglected to share that we have 2 additional long-term rent assistance programs being developed right now with new 23-25 funding. One of those is focused on youth and their families, homeless youth and their families, because what you said is exactly correct, and we've seen that through our experience. What we're doing now is very limiting. So we will be bringing that to the council. It's early in the design phase, and I'm seeking your guidance and expertise in the near future.
Hey, Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Chair Hall. Councilmember Farrell, I really appreciate your comments and expertise, and I know you hold a lot of that here that I'm hoping we can take greater advantage of, right, in terms of some of these conversations. Thank you for the presentation. I appreciate the data. I have a whole lot of questions about, was it duplicated data? Was it unduplicated data? It seemed like there were 2 types of data we were looking at depending on the area of the state that we had. So just in general, thank you for the information. And I think we got to do a little more work to make sure we're apples and apples and oranges so that we could really understand in totality the program, right? It's interesting to see the areas, and this is a statewide program, right? And we're looking for the things to learn from a statewide program. So I think doing some work on the data would be helpful for me. I've raised these questions before. I think they were part of what I'm reading between the lines, Councilmember Farrell, so you call me if I'm not. We have a challenge of cultural competency in this program.
Yeah.
Not only for youth, I mean, not only for youth of color and not only for different areas in the geography, but for the youth culture itself. And we've talked about this over and over and over again. And Jimmy, you raised it as well, which is we have organizations that are super experienced in serving adults who were trying to run a program that without, you know, a lot of time, et cetera, that are not yet culturally competent in serving youth. And I don't say that as a criticism to any organization. I'm trying to just acknowledge that is the reality that we're in. And I think the challenges, many of them, not all of them, are related to a lack of cultural competency for queer youth, for BIPOC youth, for youth living on a low income, because we don't have that cultural competency in the youth culture. And that is the biggest concern I have in terms of this entire project. So again, there's no answer to that. I'm trying to lift that up. I would like to be very definitive to say the continuation of this work with this population cannot depend upon a new legislative ask. We have rent assistance. We have rent assistance that we can allocate to a variety of populations and purposes, and we do. And Director Smith, I appreciate you saying we have some new money coming. Great. And even on top of that, or in addition to that new money, we should not be depending on a legislative ask to continue at least the rent assistance portions of this program for these populations. And I would ask that as we look at the coming year's budget, that we are, you know, in this moment, as we're looking at allocation of rent assistance, that we consider how we might set aside current dollars of rent assistance, not new ones, current dollars of rent assistance specifically for this population. There is no reason we should not be funding rent assistance for this population in spite of a pilot project, in spite of, 3 areas in the state. And that is something we don't have to wait to take action on. That is something that is within our hands right now, even as we speak. And I get it, the pie is small. And, of course, we're going to hear if you take from here, you're taking from these folks. It's okay. We have to make those decisions all the time. And to think that this population would be at the mercy of whether we can get a legislative ad package into the mix doesn't sit right with me. So I want to be very clear that I'm challenging us to figure out how we are going to continue to fund this program, whether or not we make a legislative ask and have that funding in the future. Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Farrell.
I wanted to give the rest of the council an opportunity to speak to, but
okay.
Thank you, Councilor Member Lee. I really appreciate your passion on those comments. And I guess I just wanted to make the final comment that the more upstream approach of addressing today's homeless youth, whether they are with their family or not with their family, makes a huge impact on the total number of Oregonians down the line who are experiencing homelessness. So it's, to me, one of the most impactful bang for your buck, return on investment, whatever word you want to use, in terms of you want numbers to go down. In 10 years, you've got to get upstream. And right now we're still separating out those populations, and we have slightly different programs, different definitions, different eligibility. And I think to Mary's point, having that just be more inclusive in existing programs helps us make more upstream efforts.
Thank you. Thank you both very much.
Chair Hall, may I add a couple of quick comments? I know I've chimed in here a couple of times to say quick comments, and sometimes they're not so quick, so I'll yield to your direction.
Okay, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair Hall. I appreciate your graciousness. So a couple of things here. So I want to just I am hearing, observing, and learning. I think throughout the many times that we've brought this, there's been a series of areas of feedback as we've moved through here. And I want to just name that some of that feedback is still unresolved from a programmatic and implementation place. So I want to just name that for the council. I'm also hearing and reflecting upon some of the earlier feedback that was provided from, I believe it was from you, Councilmember Lee, on an ARH item and the appreciation for which the cadence by which that was brought in terms of early thinking, conception, feedback, kind of middle ground feedback, shaping it, and then coming. And so I just want to take that back for us, myself included, as Director Smith and I sort of reflect on this feedback and where we take this into the resources that we have existing, and then the resources that are new as well. So I want to just name that there's some area by which we bring this to council that seems to have some area of improvement that I want to just also include as part of that earlier challenge that Councilmember Lee brought into the space. And then I think thinking about the themes from Councilmember Farrell and many other council members about forms of engagement, opportunities for engaging, knowing that this particular program was narrowed and perhaps incomplete in a lot of ways. There is an expansive opportunity for us to build and layer around it. So I think a lot of times with council, we've talked about where can we stack resources, where can we take data and information and take maybe what is a narrow program and build upon it to make it much more expansive and reflective of the whole person needs as it relates to youth. Knowing that, again, I think my team would be, this is an accurate statement, this is not our core expertise. This is not our core expertise. And so there is our own sort of learning and competency building to do in that. And so with all of that, I would just lay out a commitment that as we continue on with this particular program, but also begin to take the council's direction on existing and new resources to bring that into a form of engagement that acts, that better situates us to build this together based on some of the directiveness from the council. So I want to just lay those out as very clear expectations on us that the council can hold us to as part of the, yes, progress, and I think unresolved as well.
Okay, any other council members weigh in? All right then. Good discussion. And right now we're anything more on the agenda? Any last minute changes?
We do have one more item.
Oh, that's
Chair.
right. I thought so. Okay, go ahead with it, please.
I would like to take this opportunity to introduce the council to our new Assistant Director of the division, Liz Weber. She has been with the agency, I think about a year, working really on the Medicaid waiver and just shown tremendous leadership. And I'm thrilled to have her in this new role. And she will be leading the next discussion, the next presentation, and has a partner agency, which I will let Liz, AD Weber, introduce.
Thank you so much, Director Smith. Thank you, Chair Hall, members of the council, Director Bell. As Director Smith said, my name is Liz Weber. I use she, her pronouns. And I am very happy to be here today with Adrian Scavera, who's from the Mental Health and Addiction Association of Oregon, to provide a briefing on the recent completion of 2 listening sessions with people with lived experience of homelessness and housing instability. The Mental Health and Addiction Association of Oregon hosted 2 sessions and prepared a report on the data collected from the sessions. The full report is included in the council packet. This project advances Housing Stabilization's work to design and implement programs that are responsive to the needs of those with lived experience of housing instability and houselessness based on the direct compensated feedback of those impacted as recommended by Senate Bill 893 and the Task Force on Homelessness and Racial Disparities. The report data provided to us by the Mental Health and Addiction Association of Oregon will be used within housing stabilization in 2 primary ways. There's some concrete feedback gathered from participants that do directly relate to program areas. So there are important conversations highlighted about the efficacy of motel-based non-congregate shelter, for example, or the importance of direct street outreach and the importance of peer support work that is feedback that we can take into program design now and as we reevaluate programs that exist. And then the second way that this data will be used will be in collaboration with some partners from ICF to develop a longer term strategy around how to better incorporate the experience of folks with lived experience within our programming in more comprehensive ways than the narrow pathway we have with this first kind of iteration. So with that, I'm pleased to introduce Adrienne Scavera. She's the Director of Consulting and Workforce Initiatives at MHAO, and she will take us through more detail of the report, share the direct thoughts of participants, and describe the trauma-informed practices used to develop the listening sessions and follow-up feedback opportunities. And we will have time for follow-up questions, feedback, and input from the council following Adrienne's presentation. And if you are ready, Adrienne, I think you can start sharing your PowerPoint.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Assistant Director Weber, Director Bell, Director Smith, Chair Hall, and members of the council. Thanks so much for having me here today. And I'd like to acknowledge that today, September 1st, is actually the first day of National Recovery Month, so it feels very fitting, and I'm very appreciative of the opportunity to be here to share more about the lived experience engagement project that we embarked upon across a 3-month period. And as Assistant Director Weber had shared, my name is Adrienne Scavera. I work with Mental Health and Addiction Association of Oregon, and I'd like to share a little bit about MHAO and the work that we do. We are an inclusive, community-based organization that is dedicated to self-direction and honoring the voice of lived experience. We are peer-run, and what that means is that we are led and staffed by people with lived experience and a multitude of intersectional identities within that, including at least 51% of our board of directors. And the services that we provide include direct peer support services. We have workforce development services. We train the workforce. We have technical assistance, consultation, and we work with a variety of communities, including folks who experience houselessness or housing instability, and a variety of other lived experiences as well. And one of the core beliefs that we hold at MHAO is that recovery is possible for all, and that it is a self-directed process that is going to look unique for each one of us. So with that, we firmly believe that folks that receive services through MHAO have the ability to make decisions for themselves about what supports they wish to receive and what directions work best. We believe that people are the experts on their own lives and their own lived experience. And for me, that's a really important part of being trauma informed and working towards providing equitable services. And another core value that we hold is that commitment to equity work, and realizing that that is really critical to the continued success of our programs and working with the communities that we serve. And we also commit to engaging in repair work when missteps occur, and that's a really important part of this process as well. So I'd like to take us through a number of things related to this lived experience engagement project. So talking about overview of the purpose, providing some details related to the development, design, and implementation, providing some information about demographics of who participated within our 2 listening sessions, and then uplifting some of the feedback and some of the participant voices that we heard throughout our listening session process, and also connecting that to sample strategies that were developed connected to this work. So the primary purpose of this project was to strengthen understanding of the unique needs and perspectives of communities within Oregon experiencing houselessness. And we did this through gaining feedback and perspective of folks with lived expertise. And this was done, as AD Weber had shared, to inform State Houselessness Response Weber efforts, and program design. I'd like to spend a bit of time talking about how we did this. So we operated within a 3-month timeframe. So we were moving pretty quickly. Really, that first month dedicated primarily to collaborative efforts around planning, design, development. And then in the second month, in May, we had our first listening session. In the third and final month, we held our second and final listening session. And throughout this process, we worked collaboratively with the fantastic folks at ICF and some fantastic folks at OHCS as well. And when we were designing the listening sessions, it was really important to us to take great care to be trauma informed. In other words, to recognize the prevalence of trauma and to be responsive to that in how we were developing the opportunities. And that happens at multiple levels. We're thinking about what the physical space looks like. We were thinking about how the questions were designed, and we're always building in choice. That's a really important part of being respectful to experiences of trauma that folks might be bringing, is offering choices and really being there to learn from the participants within our listening sessions. So we made sure we had things like breaks, opportunities for connection, of additional facilitator support if necessary. We also had facilitators who themselves were folks primarily with lived experience and who also had experience with peer support as well. And bringing those skills around non-judgmental, active listening, around meeting people where they're at, around creating supportive environments where folks can feel safer sharing about topics that can be very vulnerable. And within that, we wanted to make sure that participants within our listening sessions also felt comfortable to do what they needed to do to take care of themselves. So that might mean that someone wanted to step outside of the room for a moment. They wanted to connect more with a facilitator post-session. They wanted to have a chance to grab a snack, grab a beverage, get some fresh air for a moment. We also, and I still use these myself, we also had a bunch of different tangible tactile objects where folks could have a squishy stress ball or have some other type of fidget device that could be helpful in terms of helping to recenter ourselves within our bodies while talking about some topics that can be tough and can bring up a lot for folks as we were exploring. And everything we were doing, we tried to make sure that it was voluntary. So if folks didn't want to respond to a certain question, they didn't have to respond to a certain question. And we had 8 questions that were co-developed with feedback from ICF, OHCS, as well as folks with lived experience of houselessness and housing instability within our organization. And how we held our first listening session was we shared those questions with folks. And then we said, we'd love to hear from you about what you would like to share with us today. And so each person had the opportunity to vote using a little sticker to vote on which questions felt most important for them to speak to. And then we also provide an opportunity if someone felt that a question was not fully attended to and they wanted the chance to speak more on that. We also had big easel pads around the room where folks could also write feedback if that felt more comfortable than speaking out, or if they felt more comfortable perhaps sharing in a one-on-one capacity versus in the group settings. So we wanted to offer many options to work towards ensuring that the listening sessions were as trauma-informed as possible while we were setting those up. And so we held 2 listening sessions, one at the Peer Apocalypse Conference, which is an annual peer leadership conference for folks with lived experience of mental health, substance use, and other intersectionalities as well. And then we also held a listening session in collaboration with Central Oregon Veterans Ranch, and that was our June listening session. I'd like to share some about the respondent demographics of the folks that shared information on their identities. So 18 individuals who participated within the listening sessions, and this is combined across the 2 listening sessions, identified as white, non-Latino or Latinx. 7 respondents identified as American Indian, Alaska Native, Indigenous, or multiracial. 16 of the participants within the 2 listening sessions experienced houselessness, 12 for more than a period of 1 year. All folks who participated, within the listening sessions experienced housing instability of some type, and of those 16 specifically identified as experiencing houselessness. We also saw that over half of the listening session participants, 15 respondents, identified as a survivor of domestic violence, sexual assault, or stalking, and 11, a little bit under half, of respondents identified as a person with a disability or disabilities. And within those 2 listening sessions, we had 12 city/county regions that were represented. The majority of the participants who were participating within those 2 sessions fell in the 40 to 54 age range, followed by the 25 to 39 age range. Now that we've talked some about the overview, how we set things up, designed and developed the listening sessions, and some of the folks who were able to participate within those, we found some major themes. And those 4 major themes that emerged across those 2 listening session opportunities were state policies and advocacy, program and practice, state funding process and priorities, in other words, supports needed, and system alignment. And across those categories, we consistently heard from the participants the need for trauma-informed, compassion-based services and program design. They shared with us the need for affirmation of our collective humanity, the need to meet people where they're at, the need to practice non-judgment. And again, folks were sharing their desire to be treated as human. And that came up across both of our listening sessions multiple times across the themes. So what I'd like to do next is share a little bit more about participant voices, and also share some sample strategies connected to that. Because part of developing trauma-informed opportunities, and part of really being respectful of receiving folks' wisdom and receiving their sharing. One is compensation, as I believe Councilmember Lee had spoken to this earlier. One is compensation. So we provided $150 compensation to folks in recognition of their participation, their wisdom, the emotional labor of sharing the work that they contributed for the listening sessions. And then for me, another really important part of honoring that opportunity is also for us to ensure that the input is being used in meaningful ways. And I'm very appreciative of this opportunity to share more about what we had the privilege and honor of learning from those who participated within the listening sessions that we held in May and June. So the first theme I would like to start with is state policies and advocacy. And I'll take a moment to read the participant voices. There is such a lack of seeing faces. We're seeing bodies, seeing spaces, but not seeing faces. Another participant shared, when you move people, you are upheaving their lives for the convenience of people who see them as less than human. And I want to acknowledge that we received many many comments from folks. We took many notes for the listening sessions. And so we've just selected a couple to share with you today. And we do have the full report included within the Housing Stability Council packet, as AD Weber had shared. So sample strategies related to state policies and advocacy are to promote trauma-informed practices and flexibility, doing things like developing guidelines for best practices for trauma-informed person-directed services. I know earlier there was some talk about operationalizing how contractors are really doing what they say they're going to do. And so for this, one sample strategy is to require contractors to identify, develop, and implement trauma-informed practices within their service delivery and program, providing input opportunities to learn from folks with lived experience, to learn from folks who are receiving the services that are being provided, to provide compensation for that and to meaningfully incorporate that feedback. We also can provide education and awareness raising to better understand experiences and challenges while addressing the misconceptions and stigma. One other sample strategy is to reduce sweeps and displacement of people who are experiencing houselessness. And I know that we have a limited amount of time, and I can get really passionate and speak to things for a while. So I am going to start to move a little bit more quickly just to be respectful to that. Thank you. And program and practice. I have two voices that I'd like to uplift here. They're human beings too, with feelings, lives, and dreams. I can guarantee you very few want to be where they are. I didn't want to be there. It's not how I pictured my life. And a quote from another participant, you can't put an office in and expect the people that you want to come in. You have to go to them, get them to know your face, build that connection, those bridges, it works. Sample strategies in line with this theme is to prioritize face-to-face interactions and going out to camps and unsheltered communities, building those relationships, building those bridges, using those non-judgmental, active listening skills, really putting into practice, meeting people where they are at. And that can be both physically and emotionally as well. Another strategy is to foster compassion and understanding to promote healing and humane environments. And we can do that by such strategies as conducting an education and awareness campaign to build empathy and address misconceptions around houselessness, requiring contractors and staff to be trained in trauma-informed approaches, as well as prioritizing funding for environments that utilize trauma-informed design, architecture, and involved lived experience advisory councils to inform design, development, and implementation. And of course, having respectful compensation and meaningful incorporation of feedback within that as well. And then the next, our third theme was related to state funding process and priorities. Two voices here. People have to get to a worse situation to even be taken seriously. You have to get worse before they can help you. Once you are in that space, the people you are around are also struggling. Then to get help, you have to go to a whole new space and leave that community that you have built to survive. The social supports are lacking. More funding and resources are needed, including those related to development of social supports and to continue community building that may be lacking once a person becomes housed. We also can look at motel-based non-congregate shelters, especially in rural areas. That came up several times. More drop-in centers and direct transportation to them. Transportation being an issue came up numerous times as well. And also bolstering funding and resources with a focus on prevention. And our final theme was under system alignment. And a participant voice says, what is not working? Expecting individuals to find their own ways through the system. There are people they are to receive them with red tape, big words, and expectations of understanding. The path is not made clear. A few sample strategies for consideration here include simplifying referral pathways and processes for access, as well as providing peer support specialists or other supporters to help build trust, develop relationships, use those trauma-informed, non-judgmental, meeting folks where they are at approaches, and also aiding with system navigation for a system that can be very complex, very overwhelming, very challenging for folks that are trying to get their needs met. And as I start to wrap up, I'd like to include some feedback that we received. We had opportunities to debrief and also developed a survey to get some additional feedback from folks who participated within the listening session to ensure that we were being responsive to their input about the questions, the design, how it felt for them. And some strengths included folks shared with us that they felt that it was a very meaningful, interactive opportunity, and that they felt the facilitators did a great job, and that was very important to have those compassionate, skilled facilitators helping to support that space while folks were sharing about topics that got very vulnerable and could take a lot of courage to speak to. That it was trauma-informed was positive feedback that we received from participants. They felt that made a difference, that we took care to build that in. And then folks also shared that they felt appreciated and valued, and part of that was the fact that compensation was provided, as well as snacks and beverages during the time that they were in the listening session with us. And a couple of future improvements that we could make were to include a resource summary if we were to do future listening sessions. So relevant resources that could be shared with folks. We received some feedback about adjusting some of the questions, phrasing some of them a little differently. And then we got some feedback that said it would be helpful to have a longer session so that there would be more time for folks to really share. So I am very appreciative of the opportunity to be here and to share about what we learned. And I'm also very thankful to everyone who participated within the listening sessions and who opened up to us in that way. And I'm thankful for the collaboration from OHCS, ICF, and our other partners as well. So thank you all so much for the opportunity to be here and share today. And I am open to questions or comments if there are any, if that's appropriate at this time.
Sure. Council members, comments or questions on this presentation? Second and last call. Okay, Councilmember Lee.
I couldn't help myself. Thank you so much for the presentation. I very much appreciate it, and the effort that was put forward into getting this information. And I will be interested in the future to hear how the division will be taking the information that we've now asked and infusing it into all aspects of the work moving forward. So that's nothing that can be answered now. And it would be lovely next month to, or as you figure that out, to hear how and where and why we are incorporating this feedback, so we don't run the risk of having asked people in such an intentional and careful manner, and then not having some ways in which we can say this is how we've thought about it, worked with the information, and where the impact has landed us. Thank you.
Hey, anyone else from the council want to weigh in? One more call. Well, if not, I guess that wraps up this item. And any final comments from the council? Any last words of wisdom from Director Bell? Okay.
I'll just make a brief comment here. Just much appreciation for this last topic, and certainly Adrian and the collective work. I want to just name that this is part of the appropriate growth and maturity of the organization, in particular the housing stabilization team, as we seek to continue having a constructive role in addressing and solving issues related that people experiencing homelessness face. And I think making sure that we particularly as a government agency are beginning to locate ourselves as role and responsibility and begin to take that into action, considering their humanity. And so this is our part of our own learning. And I think you said level up earlier, Chair Hall, this is part of our level up really in the learning space, and looking forward to bringing this back in concerted action.
Thank you, Director Bell. Again, thank you to all our presenters. Thanks to members of the public who offered public comment. And as always, thank you, my fellow council members, for wonderful, thoughtful engagement. It is exactly 12 noon according to my computer's clock, and we are ready to adjourn this meeting. So I want to wish everybody a great Labor Day weekend, and we'll see you in October.